Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Miss Burt slash Hawkinson here, and I am here this week during week 4 of emergency learning to talk about money. That's right. We're going to talk about price and price of goods and how exactly price is determined. So, our learning target, I can describe how price is determined through supply and demand in the United States economy. And let's get started. So, take a look down at the clothes that you are wearing. How did you get those clothes? Somebody, whether it be you, your parents, aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, someone bought those for you. And they probably paid for them with money or a credit card or some sort of currency. Now, that shirt you're wearing, how much was it? How much did it cost? 20 bucks, $5, $50? And here's the real question. Why? Why did it cost that amount of money? Well, let's take a look at it. First of all, what is price? Well, price, you probably know, is the amount of money exchanged for a good or service. A good being a product like your shoes, your clothes, your computer. A service being something that someone can do for you. Like I'm giving you a service right now by teaching you. Our healthcare providers, that's a service. So the price of something is the amount of money exchanged for a good or a service. And now price is determined by the interaction of what we call supply and demand. Now, one of the most important things you need to understand is that price is determined by the interaction of those two things. And we're going to talk about what those are, but you need to know that both of them are very important for determining price. You need both supply and demand. So price, buyers and sellers respond to price changes. When the price of a product, a good or service changes, buyers change the quantity they are willing and able to buy, and sellers change the quantity they are willing and able to bring to the market. So, for example, the more something costs, the higher the price, the less a buyer is inclined to buy it. And the cheaper it is, the more you feel like you want to get one, right? That's why dollar stores exist. Hello. And sellers, the more money that you can charge for your product, well, the more you want to sell because you have a bigger opportunity to make money. And the less you can charge, the cheaper your product is, well, you might not feel as inclined to make a lot. So neither supply or demand alone can set the price. You need both. You need both supply and demand to interact in order to find that happy medium of how much a product costs. So let's talk about those two words. I've said them quite a few times now, supply and demand. What are they? Let's start with demand. So, what is demand? Demand is the amount of good or service that consumers are willing and able to buy. So, the law of demand says consumers will buy more of a good or service at lower prices and they'll buy less at higher prices. So, demand is how we are willing as the buyers, how much we're willing to spend. High demand, high price, lower demand, lower price, higher demand. So, for example, think about the dollar store, right? You guys can go to the dollar store, you can pick up a notebook or a pack of pencils for $1, and we might buy a lot of them. Well, they're kind of cheap. Lower price, higher demand. I feel like I could go and buy those. Now, how many of you guys have a Lamborghini in your front yard? And if you do, don't forget me when you take your private jet on vacations. But seriously, how many of you have a Lamborghini in your driveway? Very few of us, myself included. I obviously do. But higher price, lower quantity. There's less Lamborghinis in the world than there are pencils. All right. So less that something costs, the more that there's a demand for it. And the more something costs, the less there's a demand for it. What is supply? Well, supply works in kind of the opposite. The amount of supply is the amount of good or service that producers are willing and able to offer for sale. So now we're talking about people who are producing the product, the people who are selling the product. In demand, we're talking about the buyers. Now we're talking about the people who are selling. The law of supply says producers will produce more when they can sell at a higher price, and they'll produce less when they can sell at a lower price. So if you take a look at this graph, it's going the opposite direction as demand. So the lower the price of something, the less that suppliers feel inclined to make, And the higher they can sell it for, the more they feel inclined to make. So now that we understand supply and demand, I said originally that price is determined by the interaction of supply and demand. So now let's talk about when those two graphs meet right in the middle, that's when we get our price. We call this our equilibrium price. Equilibrium price is the point where supply and demand meet. Everyone who wants to sell at that price can sell at that price, and everyone who wants to buy at that price can buy at that price, and everyone is happy. So, remembering those graphs that we saw, if you could put supply and demand on a graph together, they actually make an X. Remember, with demand, the higher that something costs, the less quantity wise that buyers are likely to buy. And with supply, the more that something can be sold for, the more a supplier is going to want to supply. So the higher the quantity. So they actually are opposites when graphed. And if you graph them and you find right where they meet, that is your equilibrium price. It's where buyers are happy, sellers are happy, and that is how we determine price. So again, remember, price is determined between the interaction of supply and demand. You need both. And you need to see where they cross on a graph, and that is your equilibrium price. That's how much something's going to cost. Now, what's a surplus? Well, you've probably heard this word before. Surplus is the amount of a product that is produced that doesn't match the amount that customers want to buy. So in this case, the market is actually producing more than the quantity demanded. It's also known as excess supply. So when you take a look at a graph, anything that's above your equilibrium price in between supply and demand, that's a surplus. It means that the producer, somebody who's making the product, they're making too much and there's not enough buyers to buy it. So now we have all this extra of the product, and that's your surplus. Now on the flip side, what's a shortage? Anybody else's toilet paper aisle still look like that? What is going on? It's because we have a shortage of toilet paper. Shortage is the amount that producers want or are able to sell is less than the amount that customers want to buy. So in our case, we want toilet paper. Unfortunately, the people producing toilet paper can't make it fast enough, so we don't have enough on the shelves. The market produces less than the quantity is demanded. We demand a lot of toilet paper. They can't supply enough. This is known as excess demand. So a shortage fills in the gap below our equilibrium price. Now this looks pretty crazy, but this is actually how we could graph supply and demand. And any of you who know me know that this gives me a headache. I hate math, but it's actually pretty easy. So let's go over a really quick recap. Here's all our new vocab from this presentation. First of all, price, the amount of money exchanged for a good or service. Price is determined by the interaction of supply and demand. You need those two lines to intersect in order to find what our happy medium is. Demand is the amount of good or service that consumers are willing and able to buy. So demand is how much we, as people buying the product, are able to buy and how much we want to buy. Supply is for the people who are producing the product. Supply is the amount of good or service that producers are willing and able to offer for sale. Now, where we as the buyers and the sellers come together and we are happy, that's our equilibrium price. The point where supply and demand meet on a graph, that's where the sellers are happy selling at that price point, buyers are happy buying at that price point, and where that meets, equilibrium price. That's our price. Surplus, the market produces way more quantity than the quantity demanded. They're making too much stuff. There's not enough people to buy it. Shortage, we're all very familiar with right now. The shortage is that the market is producing less than the quantity demanded. We want more stuff. And that's really it. So now, next time you go to the store and you see a price tag on something, you'll know that that price was created by the interaction of supply and demand, and that when you purchase that, you, as the buyer with the law of demand, are happy with that price, and the seller, they're pretty happy that you purchased their product.